Hello, friends. We're back with episode 166 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. If you're new to the show, this is where we talk about the latest happenings at Our Weekly every single week with a take on the latest highlights and other great finds that are in the issue. My name is Eric Nance, and I usually say every week, because we usually do it, but the universe kind of gave us a sign last week that maybe it was time for us to take a little week off. So I think we're better for it. But in any event, we are back this week, but I'm never alone on this. I am joined by my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Eric. Yep, we did record a great, I shouldn't say record. We did have a great episode last week. We just missed the record in case you can't tell. But this week we have pushed the button, so let's hope that it makes it out there to the universe.
Yes, and as Mike can attest to, when he and I connected this morning, this was the very first thing yours truly did. So sometimes, the universe says, may have gotten too comfortable before. So, the bots can't automate everything, Mike. AI can't automate all this either, unfortunately. So.
No, that's right. Just add it to the collection of lost episodes out there. Highly valuable.
Luckily, it's still single digits, and we hope to keep it that way.
That's right.
But what's not lost? We got another fantastic issue to talk about today, and our curator this week was another longtime member of the Our Weekly team, Jonathan Carroll. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your pull requests and other suggestions. And it's fun when he can lead off with, you might say, straight from the source, if you will, because we have a blog post straight from the R development blog itself on some of the latest patches and enhancements that have been made into base R to support a new frontier of object-oriented programming systems. And if you're coming into base R, you may have noticed that there are two built-in object-oriented programming systems right off the bat with no additional packages needed. These are called S3 and S4. They both accomplish similar things, albeit they go about it a bit differently. But you will find that, for instance, a lot of the tidyverse packages have been built upon S3, whereas other packages in the R ecosystem, especially those around the bioconductor side of things, have links to S4. And we've covered in previous episodes the benefits and trade-offs of each of those. But ever since about a year and a half ago, there has been a new effort, a joint effort, I should say, between the R core team as well as developers of, say, the tidyverse and other community-related packages on a new object-oriented programming system that is now called S7, which right now is available as a standalone package that you can import into R. But with the advent of S7, it has provided the R core team a time to reflect, if you will, on how to maybe help out packages like S7 in the future become part of the base R installation. And they've identified a few key gaps, if you will, of ways to make this journey of incorporating into base R a bit easier. And this blog post in particular talks about a set of 4 different patches that have been landed ever since R version 4.3.0 that are going to pave the way for an easier on-ramp of S7 and perhaps other packages in the future to take advantage of some of these principles that have been built into R for quite some time, but to help give a more friendly interface around these. We'll do a quick recap of each of these 4, but we're going to, buckle up a little bit. We're going to get pretty technical here. The first one, probably the most technical here, is the concept of how dispatch works with respect to different object types and different operators. If you don't know what dispatch means in this context, it is really the concept of sending a generic, which is another word for function that's supposed to have like one name, such as plot or summary, but take different actions depending on the type of object being fed into it. And so it will say, hey, if I want to do a summary of a data frame, it's going to do like a quick 5-number summary of each variable in your data frame, versus for a model object, it's going to give you those model fit convergence statistics, those likelihood statistics, and other information. And typically for S3, a generic will use the first argument that is passed into that method call to help determine where it dispatches. S4 kind of takes a more general approach. It could be any number of arguments in that call that help determine which method gets dispatched to. S7 is somewhere in between. It has this intricate kind of double dispatch system where one argument will then key off based on the second argument for an internal S7 specific method to help with the dispatching. Even I'm not quite sure how that part works, but luckily for the rest of this explanation, we really need to know that because now, since version 4.3, they are now helping the situation where it's not always just like a summary or of a function like that. A lot of the operator functions in R, such as like the plus or the multiplication or many of these others, actually are built on two arguments, right? You don't see it, but the left hand and the right hand side of these operators are like the two arguments to the actual function itself. Well, before this patch, it would always, if there was ever a mismatch in the types of arguments that are in these kind of operator type methods, R would warn you, hey, these aren't the same type, and it wouldn't dispatch anything that was based on those. Now, since 4.3, there's a new function built into base R called choose_ops_method, which is going to let an object type declare that they are, in fact, based on a combination of different methods for that argument pair, not just one method. Where this is really going to come into play is the situation where you have a pretty complex method that wants to do like these operator methods that is meant to do a unique thing, but be able to take into account that these argument types going in could be more than one type. And they use an example from reticulate in this piece, which I think is quite interesting here. But for those that aren't aware, reticulate is the R package that interfaces with Python under the hood, and hence it's going to find a way for your R code to go to the appropriate Python method. But especially in the space of machine learning and other methods like that, sometimes these operators that you might want to build a custom, method on, they're going to have different things inside each of the left and right side, if you will. So in the example they have in the post, it's based on TensorFlow, where you might have an interesting object that's based on a tensor itself, which is a Python object, but you might want to add to that like a simple array in Python or whatever. Whereas before R4.3, it wouldn't know what to do because these were two different object types. But now, with this choose_ops method, reticulate can say, okay, for this unique type of combination of an array and a tensor object, dispatch to this particular method. Now, you may never really encounter this in your day-to-day development, but as a package author dealing with some more novel and more intricate class systems, this is going to be a big win for many people. So it's going to pave the way for more flexibility in these situations of building your own method on these, what you may call classical operator type functions. And speaking of those classical operator type functions, there has been one that's kind of had a unique, you might say, history in where it's invoked. And that in particular is the multiplication surrounded by percent signs. If you've done any like math in R or maybe in your graduate school or other class training, you probably used this when you had to multiply matrices together if you're learning the ropes of linear algebra and whatnot. Prior to R version 4.3, this only worked with either S4 objects or base R objects. Well, guess what? Now that in 4.3, there is a way to have now a new generic category called matrix ops, where it's going to have this built-in operator as one of its first citizens of it, so to speak. But package authors and developers of new object class systems could help put in new methods into this. And they say in the future, within base R, they're going to fold in the cross prod and the t-cross prod functions into this family. So they do admit this is meant for backward compatibility, but it's also intending this to let other packages have to do with operations that are more unique in this situation, such as S7 in the future, be able to do the appropriate classification of these methods. And yeah, we're not quite done yet. We got 2 more to go. One of these is also filling a need that can be inconvenient, or maybe it was a bit difficult in the past, of trying to figure out for an object type what class it inherits from. There is a function in base R called inherits, where you put in as the first argument the object itself, and the second argument of the name of the class that is meant to check if it inherits from. Well, a lot of these class names that for an S3 standpoint were kind of built in as an attribute and not really meant for human consumption. It was not meant to be very syntactically, very easy to understand, apparently. Well, now in the inherits function, ever since version 4.3, you can now have arbitrary objects as that second argument that you're going to use to check for inheritance of that first argument, which means you don't have to memorize or go in source code to figure out what is that name of that S3 object type that or class type that you're checking from. You can now feed in a logical name of this or an object itself. So the example they have in S7, where they define a class called class X, they give an object called class X of that new class, and then you can now use that as a second argument instead of a string trying to guess what that class type is. So that's also meant for use of S7 to get into base R eventually, but there's no reason other packages can't inherit that same idea. Again, similar to the Python side of it, where you might have in your reticulate package, building on reticulate, maybe a new class name that can be a lot easier to type for the user. Last but certainly not least, if you're familiar with S4, if you ever explore that, the way to get into what we call slots of these objects that you create with S4 has been the @ sign. It's kind of been like the $sign to me when you would use that in like your data frame, $sign, name a variable. In S4, it's been quite similar. You would have your object that was built in S4, use the @ sign, and then you would start typing in like the name of either the method or the slot that you want to get more information on. Well, this never worked for anything besides S4. Well, now, ever since 4.3, now that can be used with S3 dispatching as well. I still don't quite know in my day-to-day when I would actually use this, but they do give justification for this by saying that S7 is taking bits of S4, albeit these more formal definitions of slots and other formals that are going into these class types. And now, if you have that muscle memory of using S4 and this @ sign to get into these different slots, you're going to be able to use this of S3 and S7 now as well. Again, not sure when I'll use that day to day, but again, many of these changes are paving the way for an eventual future state of S7 becoming part of the base R installation. So I think it's one of those things we're going to see the fruits of this labor more down the road. But if you ever had questions on what our core project is doing to get this state ready, this blog post is definitely for you, and especially if you want a primer on how these are going to make your life at developing a new object-oriented programming system or building upon, say, S3 or the new S7. These are definitely features that you'll want to keep your eye on as you're developing your source code for that.
Yeah, Eric, this is pretty exciting stuff, and it's interesting to me to see how Posit and the R-Core team are coming together on this initiative, as well as some others. It's really cool to have that collaboration out there between the brightest minds in some of the brightest minds in the R ecosystem. And if I understand it correctly, I think the roadmap here is that this new framework is currently out there as an R package called S7 for developers to today, if you want to, download, install, and kick the tires on it for a while. And then once the team feels that the package is stable across a wide variety of use cases, I believe the idea is to bring S7 into base R. And I don't know if there's any specific timeline on that we saw in the blog post.
Not yet. Looks like it's still got some work to do.
Yeah, so I would imagine that it's going to be a function of how much use this S7R package gets and how many folks out there can download it and try it out, and how many edge cases they can find before they finally feel that S7 is stable enough to bring into base R. But this is all, I think extremely exciting stuff for those who are trying to sort of push the boundaries of what R can do. I think a lot of the power behind this object-oriented programming approaches is actually in making sort of the end user's life easier, and making the UX for our users that maybe don't necessarily need to know or care about methods, classes, object-oriented programming, make their day-to-day jobs easier. Just like you said, Eric, we have these generic functions. Summary, you can call that against a data frame and get your quantiles for each column, or you can call it against a model object. And each for most authors of R packages that contain predictive modeling frameworks, they all typically implement their own sort of summary generic or print generic as well against the model objects that those packages offer. And the ability to sort of do that and custom tailor what the end user is going to see on screen is really cool. It's really powerful. And for those of us in our R journey, or even intermediate in our R journey, the fact that we just sort of get that nice functionality for free is fantastic, and it makes everybody's life easier. I think it contributes to some of the reasons why R can be a friendlier language for some folks to pick up. So the fact that we're getting some additional extension functionality beyond S3, what S3 can do in this new S7 implementation, particularly with sort of that second argument idea, I think is going to go a long way to continuing to help those hardcore R developers make everybody else's life a lot easier. So we're very appreciative of that.
Yep, exactly. And I'll admit my journey in OOP systems right now has been on a different package, R6, as I'm doing some Shiny extensions as we speak. But it has been on my bucket list, so to speak, to get into S7. And our good friend John Harmon's been doing some work of S7 as well in some of his package development exploration. So it's on my to-do list. But as you know, Mike, there's only so much time in the day.
I'm in the same boat, Eric. I have some grandiose ideas, still sort of on the S3 object-oriented side, but we have this credit scorecard package that leverages traditionally just a GLM, a logistic regression model, but it's very possible to stick these scorecard models or wrap them around other modeling types like XGBoost and something black box. But the methodology for doing so is quite a bit different. So I'd have to stand up a lot of different, object-oriented approaches to ensuring that these generics that we've written, fire correctly. So I have lots of ideas and plans as well, but it's only so much time, as you said.
You know me, I love it when we have more open resources for both developers and users to kind of test their visualization muscle on, so to speak, and really generate some awesome insights. And our second highlight is highlighting just that. It comes from Kyle Walker, who is a director of research for Lin, if I'm pronouncing that right, as well as he has apparently his own consulting company for data science. And he highlights an area that I did not know about until I read this post. So again, I'm always learning when I read these. But there is a project out there called the Overture Maps Datasets Initiative, which is a project not just from one, not two, but multiple big tech giants in the tech sector, such as Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta, and along with others, to help produce both open and standardized geospatial data sets. My goodness, this looks really fun, and it's meant for developers to be able to use in the applications that they develop. Well, of course, Nothing wrong with using this in R as well. Now, how will we pull this off on the R side of things? Guess what? These data sets are written in what format, Mike?
My favorite format, Eric, Parquet.
Exactly. We've been harping on Parquet for many months now on this show, but these data sets have been shared as objects in S3 storage on AWS for public consumption with Parquet. And just how can you import these into R itself? Guess what? The arrow package is your friend here, because the arrow package will be able to import not just these Parquet files that are stored locally on your disk. They can read from remote locations as well, such as these S3 locations. And not just read from them. It's not like you're behind the scenes, like downloading in some temp area and then somehow importing all this into your system. No. These are kept remote. And this is really important, the example that Kyle outlines here, because he found a unique data set with respect to building coordinates or topologies. And this data set has, get this, over 2.35 billion.
That's a B.
Building footprints around the world, Mike. Have you ever had your hands on a data set this large?
How big's the New York taxi data set? Probably not that big.
I don't think it's that big. Yeah, I think that's in the millions, but boy, we're talking about billions here. So you can imagine if you put that in your R system, yeah, it's going to probably blow up and smoke fire or whatever in your laptop or PC of choice. So you don't want that in your home memory. Guess what? Arrow comes compatible with dplyr functionality, so you can use this to query for just the parts of the data you need. And in particular, in the example that Kyle walks through here, he has an example of filtering the coordinates based on San Francisco, i.e. the state of California, where he was able to grab the actual coordinates from, I believe, another package to get the coordinates right, the bounding boxes. And then once you have that, well, of course, we're visual, right? We want to see what this looks like. The package called RDEC, which is a wrapper on DECGL, gives you a way to have a 3D based visualization of these buildings. And in the post, the code itself, pretty straightforward. Really not too much going on here other than setting your initial view and centering the coordinates, doing some zooming parameters, and then adding the layer, i.e. the polygon layer, based on that data, the building topology from San Francisco, and then being able to basically feed in variables for the various attributes, much like ggplot2 in a sense. And lo and behold, if you're looking at this in your modern podcast app, you'll see in the chapter image marker, you got a really nice looking topology layout of San Francisco that looks pretty darn cool, if I dare say so myself. And so Kyle was curious. It looks like the United States portion of this data has a little more fleshed out building data, so to speak. He thought, what's it look like in the rest of the world, just to kind of test that, hypothesis out. He did the same kind of code, but instead of going to the US, he went to Sydney, Australia to see what kind of topology he would see here. And you do see that there's only maybe, looks like about 15 or 20 buildings that are represented here, which obviously we know Sydney's a big city, right? So there's got to be a lot more to it. But this just goes to show this iterative nature, or might say the early stages of this initiative. So perhaps there will be others in the community that start contributing more data to the Australia side of things or other parts of the world. But in any event, you've got access to this really innovative set of data. You do not have to blow up your R session and import it in. Parquet is, again, we've been harping on this before. It's opening up a ton of possibilities for you as an R developer, an R user, to be able to do some really great insights without having to break the bank on your system becoming a memory powerhouse or whatnot. So really phenomenal visuals here. And I definitely, if I ever get into the spatial side of things later on, this set of data looks like a great source to draw upon.
Yeah, Eric, I couldn't be more excited about this project. In the past, I've leveraged typically the Google suite of APIs for geolocation types of activities. I think if you remember my Connecticut COVID-19 at-home test spotter Shiny app that I shared on the Shiny Dev series, we used the Google Places API to allow users to search for particular places in the U.S. and have that autocomplete that you're familiar with seeing if you've ever been on Google Maps, and ensure that the particular place they selected is a recognized location in Google's giant database. And it's a fantastic API, but there can be some cost associated with that depending on your volume. And this new project that's, as you mentioned, called Overture, which is this collaboration between these powerhouses, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta, to open source these large geospatial data sets is really exciting. And they talk about 5 different particular geospatial data sets out there. One being administrative boundaries, 2 land and water features, building footprints and roof prints, and then points of interest, which I think are like that Places data set that I was talking about, Places API. And then last is transportation layers, like roads and public transit ways. One other feature that I hadn't seen before is this deck.gl library, which is a relatively new, I think, framework for visualizing these very large data sets. And as you can see in the blog post, the output of the deck.gl maps is beautiful. You have great visuals there, very modern looking, really, really cool. And that RDeck package is just this great wrapper for the API that, as you said, the code here is quite minimal. It's pretty incredible. There's some data prep work that goes on to grab counties and to filter down the buildings within a particular bounding box coordinates that we care about, using the dplyr and arrow combination, as well as the SF package. And then there's this one call, a few lines, I think it's 2 arguments really, to the RDeck package in order to sort of build that base map, and then leverage this add polygon layer function on top of that to really stick your polygons on top of there that are going to draw the different shapes on the map that you're looking for, all these different buildings and their heights and the gradients and scales and things like that. And that's about it. It's pretty incredible. It should feel pretty straightforward and familiar to those who have done any geospatial analysis before. So the fact that we just continue to get these higher and higher performant tools for all of our data science work is super exciting. A great blog post, great walkthrough. I used, we've talked about this a million times on the podcast before, and my love for Parquet as well as the Arrow package. I recently used DuckDB for the first time last week. Finally, I had a 25 million by 50 column SQL Server table that I wasn't about to try to write summary queries against, because I tried to do that once and it did not end well. Let's just put it that way. So I was able to write that out to Parquet using a chunked approach, and the new, I think, ADBC, that database connection for the Arrow framework, and wrote that out to Parquet. And then I used DuckDB to query this Parquet file that ended up being, I think around 1 gig for these 25 million rows by 50 columns SQL Server table. And the queries that I was running with DuckDB were taking like less than a second. It was insane. It was incredible. So I can't sort of recommend these frameworks enough for high performance data analysis. And this is a fantastic use case of bringing a few different tools together in terms of some of the Tidyverse ecosystem, the Arrow project, some of these other data visualization libraries, and then this new deck.gl library, which is incredibly exciting. And like I said, sort of the outputs here are really visually appealing and nice. So it's a fantastic blog post to have out there. So thanks to Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've even just thought of a use case for this myself in a rather geeky project where I'm starting to interface more with some interesting podcast metadata, and some of it is the location where downloads are occurring from. Maybe I could use this to map out the downloads of our weekly highlights on a nice little map, so to speak. So I'm, cover me intrigued, and I still think Parquet is becoming the new CSV in a lot of our data science circles, and this is just yet more credence to that. So yeah, really, really fun to learn about the innovations in this space as well. last but certainly not least on our highlights section today, we in this quote unquote lost episode last week, we had a great discussion on ways that have been explored to help automate some refactoring of tests. Well, we're going to make good on it because we have part 2 of that series here. We're going to talk about in the highlights here. And this comes to us from L. Salmon, who, of course, was a former contributor here at R Weekly and now is a research software engineer with R OpenSci and R Hub and Syncra as well. And this is part 2 of her quest to refactor test files in one of her packages. And again, in her post last week, which again is on last week's R Weekly issue, she had a fantastic, albeit quite in-depth system of using a combination of parsing R code and XML representation of code to find calls to certain expectation functions and be able to swap them on the fly without having to do the infamous Control F, find and replace for all these other instances. Well, we're getting a little more human readable here, so to speak, in terms of automation versus, some principles that I think on paper they make complete sense. But again, you got to put it into practice, right? And I already have one project where I put maybe half of these in practice, and I'm going to go back and put the rest in practice. We'll kind of hit these one by one here. But a lot of these are going to relate to not just tests, but also your base R code as well for your package or of a routine. Make variable names that actually make sense. And this also applies to your test suite as well, because it may be tempting if you're like doing a similar expectation, but just varying like one or two things, kind of reuse those variable names over and over again. No, don't do that. It'll make debugging a lot worse, especially if most of those expectations pass, except for one thing here and there. So having variable names that make more sense to you when you read it, don't be afraid to make them verbose. I like long variable names if it helps my cognitive function. And so don't worry about, trying to be perfect with that. Again, you are probably the one that's going to read this the most. So be nice to future you on this. And speaking of variable names, you again may be tempted to use the same ones across different tests if they're all doing the similar type thing. You might want to change those up a little bit. So in her example here, she's got a function that has like 3 different modes of complexity, and she changes those inputs going into the expectations based on that mode, if you will. Easy, medium, and hard versus like XXX for all of them. So again, tailor it to the way you as a developer can help with your debugging when these expectations are not passing. And then as you're developing these expectations, you may think about, when I wrote this package, I had like all my objects created above, and then I put them like my processing functions below that or whatnot. Maybe for testing, you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to put the objects you're creating related to the expectation that it's testing with, and put those groups together instead of like all your objects in one part and then all your expectations in another part. Again, some of this is subjective, but again, when you're debugging things, it may be much more straightforward to have these logical groupings of the object and expectation with each other instead of like everything in the preamble of your test and then every expectations all below it. So again, these are all nice enhancements, but she's not done there. She's got a lot more here, Mike, that I think you could definitely relate to as a developer as well.
Yeah, unit testing is a funny thing, Eric, because some of the sort of best practices that you might think of in terms of how we like to author our code can sometimes go by the wayside or not necessarily make as much sense within a unit testing framework. And her last sort of section here that she talks about, or as you were discussing before, is maybe not create all those different objects and then run your sort of expectations against those different objects that you previously created, but keep everything sort of logically together. So if you're about to execute a test using, expect equal or expect greater than or something like that, you should have the object that you're using in that test, or objects that you're using in that test, as close to that as possible. And I think that makes a lot of sense. When I'm reading some source code of developers that I admire and try to mimic, I think that that's something that I see quite often in their unit tests within their test.dat folder, is that everything is sort of chunked up nicely into different sort of logical sections where they have a very particular thing that they are trying to test, and they have that very much segmented in one location. However, sometimes you're trying not to recreate the wheel all the time as well, and there may be opportunities maybe at the header of that file before you start executing any of your unit tests to create a particular object that you're going to actually pass and leverage in a lot of the different tests that you're running. So there's some trade-offs here, a lot to think about. I say this, I feel like every time Mael authors a blog post, but I feel like these topics aren't something that's talked about very often. So it's really nice to have someone out there who is talking about her opinions and best practices, most of which I sincerely relate to. But these are a lot of things that I've had to learn the hard way, sort of by trial and error over the years, and not necessarily had a lot of content out there to follow. So very grateful for Mael for putting this together. And maybe the last point that she puts out is try to use a bug summary and not just maybe the issue number that you're solving as your test name. If you go back and take a look at a test, where sort of your test, that first argument there is just this string that says, bug number 666 is fixed, as Mel uses for an example. She certainly prefers that you write that string to say something like, my awesome function does not remove the ordering, sort of maybe providing the summary of that issue as opposed to just the issue number itself, so that when folks are going back to understand and look at the tests that have been written, it's very easy for them to be able to see exactly what's taking place in these tests, what has been solved, what maybe still is open and needs a test around that. And she recommends, use that summary as that string, that first argument to your test.dat call, but maybe you can have a comment within that has a link to the particular bug report or that GitHub issue. So you have sort of the best of both worlds there. So a great blog post here, again, by Mael. I really appreciate her covering a topic that I think doesn't get enough attention, and I definitely learned a lot here.
Yeah, me as well. And I've been actually, the past couple of weeks, I've been bolting on some really interesting unit tests for a Shiny app I'm about to put in production. But guess what? As much as it may seem like a paradox, Mike, 90% of those tests have nothing to do with Shiny. It's about the business logic, which again is a pattern that may not be as obvious as a Shiny developer. But guess what? Because the business logic is just based on our code, if we use summaries or visualizations or other, in this case, some Bayesian modeling. These are all things that we can take principles that Mael's outlined here, and as well as her previous posts on development best practices. So I have her blog on one tab. I have the R packages tab open on another tab, the R packages book by Hadley Wickham and Jenny Bryan. And so these have been greatly helpful. And yes, there is some Shiny Test 2 magic at the end there for what I call a more end-to-end user-focused view of it. But boy, if I have confidence in the business logic and I organize these tests such that I know exactly where to go if something fails, and sure enough, I had some failures with a survival object outcome where I was like, wait, why did it work for binomial and continuous? Why not for survival? Sure enough, I was doing a dumb thing with one of the inputs in the processing functions. But the expectation covered it, and I knew exactly where to go. So it does help future you. You've just got to try it once, I promise.
I couldn't agree more, Eric. Please, please, please write unit tests for your business logic. It's the most important place to have them.
Exactly. So I have members of our developer team helping with some of those business logic. I kind of help with the summary and visualization side of it. But in the end, we've got over 40 of these tests, and right now they're all passing. So yay for now.
Hooray.
You know what passes though as well? Passes the R curiosity test, if you will, is the rest of the R weekly issue, because we got a lot of great content for you to continue your learning journey on. with new packages, new blog posts, great new resources for you to dive into. So as usual, we'll take a couple of minutes to talk about our additional finds here. Speaking of learning, this is definitely going to be relatable to those with children here in the U.S. that have started their summer breaks, right? They're not using their course web pages now to get homework and whatnot. But most of those schools here in the U.S. build their learning systems on something called Canvas. It's a learning management system. Mike, you're going to know about this in a few years. Trust me on this. And most of the teachers will use this to help bring out assignments or get in touch with their students, add resources and whatnot. Well, if you are maybe teaching who knows, maybe a stat or math course, and you want to use R in it, but you want to use R to help automate some of your management of these resources, well, there is a package for you. This package is called VV Canvas. This is a package to automate tasks in the Canvas LMS, and this has been authored by Ewan Tomer, and this is actually part of what was new to me, a verse of packages called the Vusaverse, which is a collection of our packages tailored to student analytics with respect to teachers using these in their courses and other systems. So this package basically builds upon the Canvas API if you want to use R to help automate certain tasks like creating, assignments or finding metadata of assignments and whatnot. Looks really interesting if you're using this system with respect to your teaching. And as usual, as I say to many people, if there's an idea, there's typically a package for that. Well, little did I know there will be a package for the Canvas learning management system. So that was a new one to me. So maybe if you're one of these teachers that are on your quote unquote summer break and you want to supercharge your learning pipeline for administering your course and you use R, maybe this is for you. I have no idea. Unfortunately, as a parent, I can't leverage this API. They don't give me the keys for that. But hey, if I was ever teaching, I would.
I have heard of Canvas before. You're right, Eric. I'm not quite there yet, but I am sure that sooner rather than later, if Canvas is still around, I will be engrossed in it once my daughter gets to school. So very good to know. Very, very good highlight. I've got a couple for us. I will want to shout out Stephen Paul Sanderson, who has a bunch of little bite-sized posts, which are just fantastic little nuggets. One is called How to Remove Specific Elements from a Vector in R. He walks through approaches using base R, dplyr, and data.table, I think. He has a little blog post, How to Split a Number into Digits in R, which is fantastic. It's actually a use case that I had with DuckDB, which has fantastic function to be able to do so, to split a particular value by a delimiter into an array, and then it has a second function for picking the element of the array that you want. But that's just a tangent based upon some rabbit holes that I had to dive down recently. So I wanted to shout out Steve Sanderson for these great bite-sized posts. And then I also wanted to shout out Epsilon for this contest that they are having to win I believe, professionally designed hex logo for your R package. You have until May 31st to sign up for this, so you have a couple more days left. You have to provide some details about your R package, name, purpose, functionality, and some links, and briefly describe the design that you're looking for, design concept, any preferences that you have for the logo, and you could win a professionally designed hex logo for your R package. And if you've seen any of Epsilon's, I think, newly sort of rebranded or redone hex logos. I'm thinking about the Tapper package, which is, I believe, is that on the Shiny for Python side? That's their Rhino
that's their
equivalent.
Kind of
right?
Rhino-like wrapper,
yes,
exactly.
for building modularized Shiny for Python applications. These hex logos look super clean, super modern, really, really cool. So if you did win this, I have no doubt that the design that your R package would get for its hex logo would be very fresh and would be, sort of way ahead of most of the competition in the R ecosystem. So very exciting stuff, and thanks to Epsilon for running that contest.
Yeah, because Mike is designing a hex logo easy for you.
Not necessarily. I spend way more time than I need to spend, but it's maybe not necessarily the time that it takes to actually do the work, but maybe the finickiness that I have trying to get what I want in my head sorted out.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've massive respect for anybody that can have such such amazing design skills. When I look at these examples on the blog post here, yeah, I got absolutely nothing on that route. So all my internal packages do have a hex logo. They take me a long time to get across, and then in the end, they just you won't see them, so you'll never know. But basically, I just find some random open source image. I use Colin Fay's hex make shiny app to throw it on there with a little metadata, and then I'm done. I'm like, you know what? It's an internal package, so be it. But yeah, if you are, as Mike, you said, a package author looking to have a great hex logo, yeah, this contest is definitely for you. So you got a couple days left to sign up for that. But what won't have a deadline here is our weekly itself. It does not stop, right? I mean, we are continuing, hopefully for a very long time with sharing these great resources for you. And certainly when your trusty hosts here know how to hit magic buttons, we come with a new episode for you every single week. But of course, we love hearing from all of you too. So what are the best ways to get help with the project? First of all, it would be looking at rweekly.org, looking in the upper right. There's a little pull request button right there for the upcoming issue draft. So if you see a great new package, a great new blog post that you think should be highlighted or be part of the next issue, it's just all markdown text, very simple. Just give the hyperlink. We give a nice little contributor guideline there right in the template, so you can fill out that information. Again, very straightforward. If you know Markdown, you know how to contribute to our weekly. It is just that simple. And as well, we love to hear from you as well. There are many ways to do that. We have a somewhat new contact page because yours truly forgot that we moved to new hosts, that my previous contact page was going to be null and void. So I've got a new one up. The link has been updated in the show notes, so you'll get to that right there. That's actually some custom HTML in that, by the way. I'll be found a template online to do it, but credit to our podcast host called Podhome for giving me the keys to be able to do that. So that was kind of cool. In any event, you can fill out that, as well as if you're on a modern podcast app such as Podverse, Fountain, Cast-O-Matic. There are many others out there. You can send us a fun little boost along the way, right directly in your app itself. And these modern apps are going to be a way that you get to see those fancy chapter image markers on top of the chapters themselves, so you can kind of get a little visual cue every time we dive into another topic. But of course, we are also available on these social medias. I am on Mastodon mostly these days with @our podcast at podcastindex.social. And my quest to bring R to the world of podcasting 2.0 just hit another milestone recently. I have now open sourced a new package called OP3R, which is a front end to the OP3 API service by John Spurlock that gives open podcast metrics. And yes, now I can visualize our weekly highlights metrics with my same package with a little dplyr magic. So more to come on that as I dive into more on this escapade that I'm on. So that was from my interview on Podcasting 2.0. Adam Curry himself said, yeah, it'd be nice if we did that OP3 stuff in your dashboard. I'm like, duly noted. So new package as a result. Boardroom-driven development, nonetheless. But I'm also on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, with @the_rcast sporadically. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Just search for my name and you'll find me there. Mike, where can the listeners get a hold of you?
Eric, that is super exciting about your OP3R package. Congratulations. I'm excited to check it out and install it from GitHub and see what I can play around with. And it's an API wrapper?
API wrapper. Once again, I'm in the world of APIs now.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. I'm excited to see how you went about wrapping an API and learning a little bit more about that, because I know there's a few different ways that folks go about doing that, some best practices out there now that we have HTTR2 and things like that. So it looks like the thumbs up sounds like that's sort of the approach that you.
That's exactly what I built it upon.
I've got some APIs I need to wrap, so I will be taking a hard look at your repository. Thank you for your work there. For folks looking to get in touch with me, you can do so on Mastodon at Mike_Thomas at fosstodon.org, or you can reach out on LinkedIn if you search for Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. You can see what I'm up to lately.
Very good, very good. And so luckily, all things considered, I think we've got one in the can here. We're going to hope so anyway. But thank you so much for joining us wherever you are, and we'll be back for another edition of our Weekly Highlights next week.